Joining us now, MSNBC political analyst and professor of African American Studies at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude. Eddie, it's good to have you. Donald Trump has not announced precisely, or his team hasn't announced precisely what they might contend with or might want to change at any of these museums. But if you were going to make an educated guess, what do you imagine he's going to be going after?
First of all, it's great to see you, Katie. I think he's going to go after any story, any exhibit, any attempt to narrate the complexity of America's history. That specifically is going to revolve around issues around race, issues around gender, issues around class, any moment in our past that suggests that we are not, in so many ways, an example of democracy achieved, I think they're going to go after.
What do you think they're trying to do by eliminating stuff like that?
Well, see, I think there's a fundamental disagreement here between the Trump administration and what I take to be a kind of MAGA evangelical embrace of American civil religion, right? And those who argue that America is always on the road to a more perfect union. Trump and the Heritage Foundation and Hillsdale College, they reject the idea that we are a nation that is in some ways on the road to perfection. That kind of language, according to them, Katie, right, can allow us to talk about the conflicts, can allow us to talk about our failures. For Trump and his ilk, they're not interested in that. They're more interested in the revolution. The American founding settled everything. The founding was, in fact, it stands outside of history. It entails everything that we are and everything that we can be. So it is just a matter of remembering the founding, not talking about all of our missteps, but understanding that we are a divinely sanctioned nation. And this is really important as we try to move, as we barrel our way to the 250th, because they want to affirm that particular storybook version of America over and against this idea that we're still struggling and battling with our demons.
Yeah, there are people out there that might look at just the past 4 years, people that voted for Donald Trump, people that didn't vote for Donald Trump or may have changed their mind and ultimately voted for Donald Trump, that they might look around and say, we've gotten too divided. We talk too much about race. We talk too much about what separates us and too much about our individuality and not who we are collectively. How do you balance the idea of celebrating this country and all that we've been able to accomplish and achieve, and it has been remarkable over our 250-year history, while also acknowledging and learning from the mistakes we've made and the room we have still to grow?
That's a great question. I think Secretary Lonnie Bunch, who's the Secretary of the Smithsonian, once told me that America is more than an idea, it's an argument. It's an argument that's based on some background assumptions that are articulated in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, but they're arguments about what's the nature of citizenship. How are we to think about the relationship between the federal government and the state? What are we to make of the legacy of slavery and how we imagine belonging in social bonds and the like? Cohesion and cohesiveness can't come at the expense of the erasure of peoples and history. Right? It has to emerge in the context of us dealing with the reality of who we are. But there's this thing about America, Katie, that we have to be honest about. And that is whenever we grow tired or exhausted around the issue of racial justice, around the issue of our contradictions, we reach for the fantasy of a lily-white America. We reach for the fantasy of a consensus that can put all of the contradictions out of view. And that has been our Achilles heel. And we're right back squarely where we have been, where we were in 1926 at our 150th, where we were in 1876 at our centennial. Here we are 250 years later, and we're still dealing with that fantasy that somehow consensus can be had by ridding us of all the diversity that makes us who we are.
President Barack Obama would often say how great this country was and how proud he was of this country. There's a feeling among some people out there that Democrats have not been able to do that with the same force in recent years, that there's a lot of apologizing and a lot of contextualizing, a lot of asterisks put around the story of America and what they think about America. Do you see any Democrats right now that are finding a way to celebrate this country while also acknowledge all the stuff that you've been talking about, acknowledge the room we have and the mistakes we've made?
I take celebrating the country as trying to make the ideals real. trying to actualize the promise. That's the celebration of the country, it seems to me. The argument, as Secretary Bunch makes, is that the argument actually moves us forward. It has moved us forward. And so it seems to me that this reaching for an uncritical celebration of the country, right, that's fantasy, that's fable, that's trying to find security in myth and legend. I come out of a tradition, Katie, who's had to bear the brunt of America's hubris. You know, I embody the contradiction. And so the expectation of gratitude, that's the language of J.D. Vance, the expectation of celebration, given the history out of which I come, makes no sense to me. And to ask us to kind of quiet it or mute it, even in a moment of celebration, right? In some ways is an appeal for me to concede to the fantasy. I refuse. I refuse to do it. And I don't want Democrats to do it. In fact, I don't want Americans to do it.
Eddie Glaude, always good to have you. Thank you for joining us today.